What do you think are the most used letters of the alphabet in English?
The most used letter in English is
E.
E. Hi, welcome to episode 3 of the Children's Fireside Storytime Chat hosted by the Sheboygan County Historical Society and Museum. I am Angie Hullen, the Education Program Developer at the museum, and these are my helpers, Adlai and Jory, and their helpers, Blue Jay and Turkey.
Hi.
The question of which letters were most used in the English language was one that Samuel Morse had to think about while he was inventing his famous code called Morse Code. Have you ever heard of Morse Code?
I have. Me too.
Morse Code was a very important technology for communication before the days of cell phones, internet, or even radio. It's a code that was first developed in the 1830s, and it uses dots and dashes that translate to letters and numbers so that people could send signals using a telegraph key. Let me pick up that pen. Here's a telegraph key. Okay. The signal travels along this wire from the transmitter or the key to the receiver. Sorry. So the electrical signal will send along a wire that is 4 feet long, or it could be miles and miles long. The signal will still send. Should we try sending a message in Morse code?
Yeah.
Okay. Turkey, go ahead and try it. Okay, Turkey's ready to send the first letter, and we're going to have people at home guess what it is. Which letter has a long, long, short? Okay, got it? What's the next letter in your message, Turkey? Which letter has 3 longs? All right, Turkey, I think we got it. Send us the next letter. Long, short, short, short. Okay, next letter. Long, short, short, short. I know what that one is. Okay, what's the next letter? Short, long, short, short. Are there any other letters?
Mm-hmm.
Can you guess what Turkey's message was? G-O-B-B-L-E.
Gobble!
Gobble. Blue Jay, would you like to try sending a message? Mm-hmm. Okay. Blue Jay, can you give us your first letter? 1 long dash. Okay, what's the next letter in your message? Short, long, long. Okay, we got it. What's the next letter? Okay, and the next letter? All right, are there any other letters in your message? Does everybody have it? Blue Jay, what was your message to us?
Tweet.
Tweet.
Hey, Blue Jay, that might be the first tweet ever sent by telegraph.
Okay.
So, why did Morse have to think about which letters were most common?
That is a good question. It takes a certain amount of time to send every letter, right? So you would want the most common letters to be the shortest.
And the least common letters to be the longest.
That's right. So, for example, the letter J, which isn't used very often, has a long code. It goes long, short, long, short. And tap that out. Whereas the letter E, which appears very frequently, is just one short tap. At the museum, we use this telegraph machine to teach about the Civil War, which was a time when lots of telegraphs were being sent between military officials from camp to camp, and also to President Lincoln in Washington, D.C. People back home in places like Sheboygan County also relied on the telegraph to send news of the war to their hometowns. Everyone knew somebody who was off fighting in the war, so everyone was eager to get news of what was going on in the far-off battle states. The telegraph became very important to the railroads as well. Railroad conductors had no cell phones or walkie-talkies or radios to communicate with each other or with the rail stations, so railroad collisions and accidents were common. A man named Granville T. Woods was a railroad worker himself, and he realized that this was a huge problem. He invented the Induction Telegraph in 1887. The Induction Telegraph used static electricity from the telegraph lines that ran parallel to the train tracks. And his invention of the Induction Telegraph made it possible for trains to message with rail stations while the trains were on the move. Have you ever heard of another type of railroad called the Underground Railroad?
I have. Me too.
Yeah. Harriet Tubman and other conductors on the Underground Railroad used codes found in nature to guide escaped people to freedom.
Codes in nature? What codes in nature?
Well, for example, remember last week when we talked about constellations?
Yeah.
What is one of the most famous constellations in our part of the world?
The Big Dipper!
The Big Dipper, exactly. Harriet Tubman and other conductors used the Big Dipper to find the North Star, which would help guide them to Canada, where they could no longer be enslaved.
Were there any other nature codes used by freedom seekers over 160 years ago?
There were. Another code that nature sometimes has is the moss on trees, and that could help guide you to know which direction is north, which was really important for people who were escaping slavery 160 or 170 years ago. If a tree has moss growing on only one side of it, chances are that is the north side of the tree. Now that code doesn't work really just by looking at one tree, but if you look at a bunch of trees in the area and they all have moss growing mainly on one side, you can guess that that side is the north side. Harriet Tubman knew a lot about nature, and there is evidence that says she used the call of the barred owl as a code to let freedom seekers know when it was safe to get on the move. The call of the barred owl was perfect because it blended in with the night sounds of nature, but it is a sound that can be imitated by the human voice. Let's listen. If you want to imitate the call of the barred owl, think this phrase in your head. You cook today, I'll cook tomorrow. It's the same rhythm as the owl's call. These are just a few examples of how codes have been used throughout the history of the United States. If you can think of any others, leave your examples in the comments. We'd love to read them. And if you want to try using Morse code, you can find an example of the modern Morse code called International Morse Code on the museum's Facebook page. And if you don't have a telegraph key like ours, there are other things in your house. There are other things in your house you can use to make Morse code.
Like clapping.
Like clapping.
Or flashlights.
Or flashlights. Let's try it. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.